Law at Work is sponsored by Perrett van Niekerk Woodhouse Macholo, leading labour law specialists representing businesses throughout South and Southern Africa, as well as Case Law, the quick, fast and easy labour law search engine.
Hello, I'm Simon Coleman and welcome to this week's edition of Law at Work. Anyone who has visited a hospital or school recently will have been made acutely aware of the strike gripping the public sector. Many ask whether the strike action ever truly helps those most in need and what the real impact is of mass action on the economy. With me in the studio is Dr. Duncan Innes to give us some insight. Welcome, Duncan.
Good evening, Simon.
Duncan, perhaps before we get into things, a lot of people are saying that 2007 is possibly the year of the strike. And these things seem to happen every 2 or 3 years. Would you elaborate on that?
Well, I think in the public service sector, there have been problems in the past 2 negotiations. The first one in 1999, when the parties couldn't agree and the government unilaterally implemented their offer. And then in the last ones in 2003, there was also a lot of activity and a one-day strike around that issue, but then there was a settlement. So this is continuing that trend, but this one is a lot more serious than before. I could also add that I think other negotiations that are going on and just starting now in the mining industry, the metal and engineering industry, they look as though they're heading for a bit of trouble as well.
Yes. Duncan, why would this strike have happened? I mean, is there something that could have been done to avoid it?
Well, I think that's a good question, given that they actually started negotiations in October 2006. So I think there was plenty of time to try and find common ground and to sort out the issues around which they needed to negotiate. But for some reason they didn't get to common ground, and when the government first put in their wage offer at the beginning of May this year, it was 5.3%, which was below the rate of inflation. Yes. CPIX at that stage was at almost 6%. And the unions came in at 12%. So really they hadn't, in the preceding period, they hadn't bridged that particular gap.
Right.
There were also a whole lot of other issues. One was that the unions were looking for a 1-year agreement.
Yes.
Government wanted a 4-year agreement, which they wanted it to expire after the Soccer World Cup in 2010.
So 2010 does come into this?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think the compromise that we'll see is that they'll be negotiating wages and salaries again probably in 2 years' time, which will be 2009, just prior to the World Cup.
And there'd be a lot more pressure on the government, one would imagine, at that point.
I would have thought so, yes.
Duncan, how does the strike affect other industries? I mean, it would appear to most people that it started off with the educational facilities and also in the health sector, and then just seems to be spilling over into all these other areas. How does that happen?
Well, you know, I think, firstly, if one looks at the demands that the 19 public sector unions are making, I think other workers in other industries sympathize with those demands because, you know, government has moved from 5.3 to 6% to 6.5%, and they're currently at 7.25%. But the inflation rate, CPIX, is running at 6.3%, as we know. But more importantly, food inflation is up at 8.6%. Now, if you're a low-paid worker, low-income households in South Africa, food constitutes over 50% of household expenditure. So if you've got an 8.6% food increase with maize meal running at over 30%, that puts serious financial pressure on the household.
Absolutely.
So as far as other workers, low-paid workers are concerned, they sympathize with the public service sector in going for an increase which is well above inflation and closer to the food inflation index.
Yes.
So that's the one thing. I think the other issue is that this is an important year politically for South Africa, and there's the question of the successor to the president,
right,
which is going to be decided hopefully in the December Congress.
Okay.
And I think the COSATU unions in particular in the public service sector are flexing their muscles around this, and the whole of COSATU, I think, has a political position.
Yes.
So I think their unions in other sectors,
yes,
are also therefore sympathetic to the strike,
right,
that the public service sector workers are embarking on.
That being the case, one wonders if it really all is about money. I mean, the people that are striking at the moment, they care about the issue of food, what it costs, where is this money going to come from. There seems to be a much bigger picture at play here. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, I think every strike will have different components to it, and I think this year, because of the succession issue,
yes,
the political component is a very important one. But there are also other issues, the financial one, as we've talked about, but also in the public service sector, the government is wants to move all its employees onto a single medical aid scheme.
Right.
And that's caused problems because people feel public service employees who've been with other medical aid schemes are reluctant to move
in
on
the private sector, medical schemes
correct,
in the private sector.
Correct.
And this is one government fund that we're talking about now.
Exactly.
Okay.
So they're reluctant to give up their private sector medical aid and move into the government one.
Right.
So that's an issue feeding into it. The inflation in house prices impacts on the housing allowance that government gives
Of
their
course.
employees. So they're wanting more in that area. And of course we also have high oil prices translating into high transport costs. So all in all there are a number of different sorts of issues that are impacting on the strike.
Duncan, many people sitting at home would be going, well, why don't they just give them what they want? Why don't they give them a 12% increase? Why is that? Why wouldn't that be the case?
Well, I think there are two reasons. The one is it's obviously a question of affordability. According to the Minister, Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi, if they were to have conceded the full 12%, it would have added 200 billion rand to the employee costs of government, which are currently at about 544 billion.
Wow.
So it would have taken it up to 744 billion. But I think there's another reason which is important in this strike, is that the government are keen to try and employ more highly skilled professional people, management people, and they want to reward them, including school principals, doctors,
yes,
senior nurses, etc. So they want to reward them so that they can attract people from the private sector.
Right.
The problem is and therefore what the Minister has put into her proposals is there should be special occupational specific dispensations.
Right.
So those people, say for example, government settles at 7.25%, they would get that plus an additional amount.
Right.
So they're going to be probably quite well off. The question is, who finances that additional amount?
Exactly.
And the union's concern is that it's being financed by holding
back the increases of everybody else. Duncan, I'm sorry, that's all we have time for. Thank you very much for joining us in the studio. And that's all for this week. Until next time, goodbye.
Law at Work is sponsored by Perrett van Niekerk Woodhouse Macholo, leading labour law specialists representing businesses throughout South and Southern Africa, as well as Case Law, the quick, fast and easy labour law search engine.